2, 1. Hey! Welcome, sentient beings. I'm Shamika.
And I'm Jess, and we are Sci-Fi in real life.
That's right. This is the show that uses science fiction stories to help us talk about contemporary tech issues.
And today is no different, except that today's a little bit different. We have two special guest hosts, but before we introduce them, we owe a shout out to Bamf McGee for answering the trivia question on our Pride episode correctly. So good job.
Good job. Yes, nice. On your second shout out as well. Good job. Now, to our first guest, David Ryan Polgar. David Ryan Polgar is a pioneering tech ethicist who paved the way for the hotly debated issues around regulating speech on social media, AI ethics, unintended consequences, digital well-being, and what it means to be human in the digital age. David is the founder and executive director of All Tech is Human, which is an accelerator for tech consideration. All Tech is Human unites a broad range of technologists, academics, artists, advocates, policymakers, and students to co-create a more thoughtful future toward technology.
And our second guest host is Katie Gach. Katie Gach is a rising fifth-year PhD candidate in the Atlas Institute at CU Boulder. She also holds a master's degree in communication, culture, and technology from Georgetown University. Her research focuses on death and grief on social media, particularly in her partnership with Facebook's memorialization team. Katie is interested in how social technologies enable or hinder us from expressing emotions and how we can build technologies to let us be more human when we're online. She's also currently in training to be a death doula and loves any movie that messes with the concept of time.
So, should we let them in?
I guess so. Now's the time. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Hello.
Hey! Welcome!
Hello.
Man, I'm
So
excited
good
to be here. Hey, who wants to talk about death and technology?
Right?
This guy.
We
Yeah.
do. Always, every day.
Come on.
Yes.
It doesn't get talked about enough, you know?
Right?
Well, in my house it does, but
Well, you're a trendsetter.
the reasons for that will become very clear.
Although I guess now you can't talk about sports or anything, so it's not like you can say, hey, how about those Yankees? It's like,
Right.
They're not
you
doing
know,
anything.
right now, everybody should be talking about, sci-fi, tech, and yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
we're very excited to have you both. Thank you for being our
Yes.
first double guest hosts.
Wonderful.
So for today's sci-fi story, now that we have both of our two guests in the call, we are going to be analyzing the movie Transcendence.
Ooh, yes. Transcendence premiered in 2014, and according to our future AI Google, this story is about Dr. Will Castor, played by Johnny Depp, the world's foremost authority on artificial intelligence, who is conducting highly controversial experiments to create a sentient machine. When extremists try to kill the doctor, they inadvertently become the catalyst for him to succeed. Will's wife, Evelyn, played by Rebecca Hall, and best friend Max, played by Paul Bettany, can only watch as his thirst for knowledge evolves to an omnipresent quest for power, and his loved ones soon realize that it may be impossible to stop him.
And of course, inspired by our sci-fi story for the month, our ethical dilemma today is death and technology. So to introduce us to the concept and talk about the most pressing issues, we have Katie and David on the line. And without further ado, it is ethical dilemma time.
Death and technology ethical dilemma that is at the center of my work and my research has to do with identity and representation and presence of human beings. So what does that mean, really? Who are we when we're online is that core question. And what are the decisions that we make in how we choose to represent ourselves to the people we communicate with online? How do those representations become data? And to what extent is that data an accurate representation of who we are as human beings. I think I'm ready to pass the mic to David then.
All right, I caught the mic. Thank you, Katie, for sending that virtually over my way. Speaking of death and technology, I really wanted to talk about data and policy because I got to tell you, 2020, it's a mess. This is something that, frankly, not a lot of us do talk about. We certainly don't always like to think about our demise as a human, but it is something that you see more and more people bringing up that they should be thinking about, because as much as we think about our physical assets, our property or something like that, that might pass on to loved ones, we also need to start thinking about how our digital assets are going to be passed on. For example, we oftentimes like to talk about our digital footprint. Coming on the show today, something I was thinking about is really what's our digital death mask, right? What's our digital kind of footprint, if you will, that's going to pass on post-death? I mean, normally the way we like to think about it, and generally how we think about it in laws, is that people don't have a lot of rights, or there's not really a lot of rights that are kind of naturally passed on. For example, GDPR, which a lot of us know and talk about, that's not something that applies to the dead. But there are people out there that argue that it should. We see a lot of different examples about how somebody's life can continue on after they die. For example, we saw in Rogue One of Star Wars with Carrie Fisher, who had died not too long before the film was released. Yet they still were able to utilize her image and kind of alter it in a CGI type of capacity. So a lot of people now are thinking, what's going to happen to them after they die? What's going to happen to everything they post online? What would happen to their likeness? And it's a lot of what we're really going to be struggling with. I also saw a really interesting example when we think really about more of a pedestrian type of concern, like not the Carrie Fishers of the world, but for a lot of people that are just saying, I have a lot of information on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and Snap and TikTok. Where is this going to go? Is this something that would naturally pass on to my, let's say, if you have a spouse? The answer is not actually clear, because what happens today is that every social media company, every tech company that maintains your data is going to have a certain level of distinction with how they treat that, because everybody to a certain extent is flying blind with this issue. You see Google having kind of an inactive account that a lot of times you don't have to use it for death, but a lot of people would set that up. And basically what that is doing is it's creating a somebody who gets sent this information. So you basically say, like I would set it up and say, all right, if David hasn't used his account for this amount of time, then it's automatically going to get sent over to my wife, who would then get to decide what happens with my data. And you might say, well, why is this important? Isn't this something that would naturally just go on? And the answer is no. So 2016, you saw this really interesting case that got a little bit of media attention. And what happened was you had a wife whose husband had died, and she was trying to access the content of his iPad. And Apple said, no, you can't access it. You can't automatically receive his password. Obviously, this is done for a good reason, because you wouldn't want all these scammers easily saying, hey, this person died, send me over their password. So there's a lot of protection there. But you also need to start thinking about, and I think this is relative to a lot of movies kind of in this space, is that do you still maintain that right? So for example, if I die, it's not always clear that the information would naturally want to go to my wife or anybody else, because you might maintain a certain level of privacy around it. And this is where a lot of times we're trying to decide where that goes, what level of restriction you can have on it, and what you might want to delete from it, right? It's not something where before we might have thought, hey, a person's dead, what do they actually care about it? I think people are viewing their digital assets as a extension to their legacy, right? Our digital legacy. Therefore, we need more control. I've seen a lot of great work. One I would definitely recommend is coming out of the Aspen Tech Policy Hub, where they are focusing on this digital afterlife project. And really what some of the researchers there are saying is that right now you have a lack of awareness, 2, scattershot policies within tech companies, and 3, not a lot of good legislative policies, and they're kind of advocating for those 3 parts.
David, I love talking to you about these things because the specifics of the legal issues in the ownership ethical dilemma that you're describing are so intertwined with the identity and representation and presence questions. So every point you made, I was like, oh, right, that's also connected to this thing in identity because and some of the questions you addressed are things that I have been able to address in my research as well. Mm-hmm. So there's really no escaping the deep connections between ownership and policy and identity and how we present ourselves to each other. One of the questions that comes up really often in my research is the reality that, most of my research is focused on Facebook profiles and how loved ones handle the Facebook profiles of their people who have passed away. And Facebook is unique in that they have this legacy, contact, and memorialization options and features, which are also starting to be extended to Instagram. And no other social media company has really devoted the effort and built out the features dedicated to digital afterlives the way that Facebook has. So it's a really interesting setting for research. But you hear all the time this really interesting split in priorities that people have, where if you ask someone about their own data, their own Facebook profile, their own online accounts, they'll say, to paraphrase, "Why would I care? I will be dead." Yeah. So there's this knowledge that they're going to be unaffected by any decisions that they make about their digital afterlife. But then if you talk to the same person's spouse or partner or other loved one, parent, sibling, they will say things like, well, it's what they created, I had one research participant say, well, my mom was an artist and I wouldn't destroy her artwork after she died. That's something about her that is supposed to live on beyond her lifespan. Yeah. So you get into these questions about what is something like artwork and what is property that can be passed on and what is an indication to other people of that person's presence. Because we have these algorithms feeding people content in their news feeds and their Twitter streams, and those things popping up on your screen really at a deep level feel like the presence of that person. Yeah. And they certainly so you lose some agency over where your content goes out in the world. And, if we just have passwords to give to people to sign into our accounts and take care of those things after we're gone, you end up with this really ethically and emotionally weird situation where you can mimic the presence of a deceased person by being logged into their account. So we're in a situation where we don't always know how the presence of data is going to affect our loved ones after we're gone. It's not just files on a computer. It's not just a static profile we've created. It's stuff that's being fed out into our new and updated streams every day. Yeah. So there are some questions of ethics and identity in there about whether it is okay to have this like digital zombie of a person that looks like they're still there when we know at some level, that their body at least is gone. So,
and even on a kind of a more practical kind of moment, we always like to think about not desecrating the dead. So one of the highest offense, at least in American culture, is when we do anything to the dead that seems very disrespectful. If you even think about what happened during Black Hawk Down, where they were dragging human bodies through the streets, that was seen as such a high offense. Even though, right, the person is dead, there's no pain to be felt, but we're still seeing it as something so highly offensive. And likewise, right, if somebody kicked over somebody's grave, we would say, well, that's very disrespectful to that individual, even though it's not affecting them since they're no longer here. And I think we have to imagine the same thing for our profiles. So if you're talking, Katie, about somebody's Facebook profile, how do you maintain a certain level of respect that you would normally want around your own death? So for example, people who are going to get a burial, what happens when that body is being buried? they go through a whole process of making the person look as good as they possibly can, putting makeup on them, usually dressing them up, if it was a male in a suit. So you want to go out, right, on death, you want to go out with a very strong image. And I think a lot of people now are thinking about that with their digital assets, right? Because if you were to die, but then all of a sudden your Facebook or whatever social media account was just filled with a lot of defamatory allegations, let's say about you, you would actually be bothered, even though you're no longer here. People obviously care so much about their legacy. That's why they put their names up on buildings, and so why they do a lot of what they do in life is actually for their post-death, right? For their legacy, and we have to think about that with profiles as well. And even if I think about this from a personal standpoint, one of the reasons why I even got heavily involved in this space was even early on. I think it's about 2010. Before Facebook went mobile, somebody I knew from high school had sent me a friend request, and then I found out through a mutual friend that he had committed suicide. But the friend request still stayed there. So I still had this friend request saying that Jared wants to connect with me, and that felt very present, and which causes a little bit of mental kind of dissonance with life and death, because it wasn't saying that this is something that Jared did. It's saying that this is something that Jared is doing right now. He's asking me to join his network, to be his friend on Facebook. But then I knew, practically speaking, that was impossible. Yet there's still a person there. And I've had the same situation, right? Connected with a lot of people online who I know are no longer here. And it always causes a kind of a strange, funny feeling. And you could just tell that what we are creating is so important, because it has profound impacts on us as humans and on the human condition at large. And then even from Facebook's standpoint, this is why early on they started thinking about that in terms of their in terms of how it was impacting people. This happened from a story where somebody's daughter died, right? This father's daughter died. And then because of the algorithm, he kept on seeing photos of his dead daughter pop up as memories, right? Because this is, if you're thinking completely in a kind of like algorithmic fashion, you would say, okay, it's been a year since this photo was taken, therefore this person wants to see it again. As opposed to, we're not zeros and ones, right? If you cut up my finger, I bleed blood. I'm a real person. I'm irrational. I'm human, right? So how do we think of that in a digital context if we're oftentimes now kind of mediating our reality through these new tools?
Yeah, and I think it leads into this first question we have for y'all, is thinking about if it's possible to be digitally immortal. Because when your essence in your posts and your pictures and all of these things exist after you no longer exist, what does that mean?
I love this question because it is getting at the core question we're always asking ourselves as human beings. Am I defined by what I do? Am I defined by my memories? Am I defined by my relationships? Am I defined by my agency in the world to do something different than what I have done before? Because that's kind of the one thing that doesn't extend beyond your lifespan is your ability to change and make a different decision and to learn a new thing. And where that gets really interesting in these sci-fi situations, like we see in Transcendence, is that the memories and the skill set and the knowledge of a person and the patterns established throughout their life are allowed to learn and grow and do new things. So there is definitely, that's the question that extends through the movie, is this AI that you can see and hear and communicate with, that can interact with the world through these machines that it has guided the building of, it is able to do new things. Are those the things that person would have done in the life of their body? And there's no clear answer to that, in my opinion.
Yeah, Katie, I mean, even just taking that a step further, something that I'm really wondering is, like, when is a person no longer a person. So when we're talking about them still being alive and it's all of their data that they're actively creating and curating, does that data represent them? If we were to create some AI, transcendent like AI out of their data and they're still alive, would that be them? Or after they die, is their data now them? Or when their data starts to learn new things, is it no longer them? Or was it never them to begin with? When is a person a person? What's a person?
Yes, right? Like my undergrad degree's in anthropology, so I've been pondering that question since 2005, right? And, as have many other far more brilliant minds than me. But that is why that question is the reason that I am so attached to this metaphor of data as art. Because it is created by the unique experience of a person, by the unique skill set, memories, language, and capabilities of a person. And it is intended, in a lot of cases, to surpass them in its lifespan. I think that our data is us as much as a book that I were to write is me. My data is me as much as my published research is me, right? It's an indication of who I was at a moment in time. It is maybe an encapsulated like snapshot of me in that moment. But other people are going to interact with that, hopefully, right? Like, please cite me. Like, other people are going to interact with that work and carry it on to have, additional meanings or additional impacts outside of the initial stuff that I did. But that the same could be said of my life and the people who knew me and had relationships with me. So there's a lot of similarities, but yeah, I do have a very strong opinion that the AI, if we're still using the metaphor of what happens in the movie, when the AI starts to do things that are beyond what the person did in their life, at that point it's a separate entity to me. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of this,
Debate
especially
me.
when you, yes, well,
Yeah.
well, no, I agree with you to a large extent. I think a lot of this really has to do with what we view as a person. Even just to go to your earlier point, what is a person, right?
Well,
You surprised to see me, Joseph?
that depends.
On what?
Can you prove you're self-aware?
That's a difficult question, Dr. Tiger. Can you prove that you are?
I tend to think of it in combination, right, with a body and a brain. Whereas if you really look at a lot of the ways that we tend to argue this, right, if you brought in somebody from a theology background and then somebody who's a transhumanist, they would dramatically disagree. It's because somebody who's more of a transhumanist type of leaning is going to think of the brain as akin to a computer, right? And then even in a lot of the words that we use and a lot of the metaphors, they're viewing that in somewhat of a literal fashion. And then by that viewpoint, the body is merely a vessel, and then your actual being would be your computer that could then shift over. So that's how that type of idea kind of works. Even when we're thinking about uploading our consciousness, it would be even thinking of, again, what you see on screen is just something that is a manifestation of my computer that can kind of travel outside of that.
Deadening. Deadly. Deaf. Deafen. Deal. Dean. Dealer. Fair. Farewell.
That's not something that I personally agree with. And if I am looking at it, I truly think that a lot of the motivation, if you really unpack it, comes from the just classic issue of ego, right? Nobody wants to die at the end of the day, especially right now, even going through everything with COVID. A lot more people are faced with their mortality, and a lot more people are just aware that that what we have is fragile. But if you really think about that, though, anybody who is thinking that they can be immortal or can have this digital afterlife and have a vibrant life and it's still them, I really think that it's because they don't want to let go. But I would advise any of those folks to watch I don't know, 32% of sci-fi movies that are based on the idea that immortality is not a utopia. It's quite the opposite, because the very beauty of life happens through its fragility. It's a paradox of life that we don't want it to go away, but it's very fact of how erratic and how sometimes heartbreaking it can be is what actually injects it with its beauty. If I knew that I would live for 10,000 years, then I wouldn't care so much about using every beautiful day and jumping in the lake and going for a swim, because I would say, well, I've got 10,000 more years. But if I know that, getting hit by a bus can take this away, or cancer or something like that, then I'm more likely to say that life is beautiful. And I think that's a major part of this conversation. Not something we always think about, because again, we don't like to think about our death. But we're all going to the same place, just at different times. And I think a lot of this conversation is trying to prolong something that we can't actually prolong. We create a facsimile of something and then try to call it life, because we don't want life to ever end.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a bit earlier about the theologist and the transhumanist, and I'm interested in the role that religion plays in this conversation. As someone who went to seminary and has thought about technology and theology as well in conversation with each other. In fact, the movie Transcendence has several what I call Jesus moments, where there's biblical references, or they literally look at the AI version of the doctor and they say Jesus Christ, and it's just like so on the nose with some of these things.
Way too on the nose, right?
Wow, seriously. So,
well,
but there is a role there.
Yes, I agree, Shamika. There's also that moment at the beginning of the movie where the activist in the auditorium where the doctor is giving a speech says, "So you're trying to create your own God," and that's a very deep question. I also have a religious background, so to a very strict Christian, the idea of creating your own God is kind of the original blasphemy, right? It's the original, like, don't do that kind of thing, like that is bad. But to a transhumanist or to an agnostic or an atheist, the idea of creating your own God is exactly what, I keep forgetting the name of Johnny Depp's character.
It was Dr. Will Castor.
Yes. So, to the transhumanist or the atheist or agnostic, the idea that a man is creating his own God, as Dr. Castor's character says in the movie, that's what we've always done. So it's not offensive. It's an ongoing pattern of human behavior. So that question is super interesting from a religious standpoint as well. And but this brings me back to, David, something you said about the idea that human life being temporary is what gives it its value, what gives it its beauty and its preciousness. That's a really great summary of the show The Good Place, right? Yeah.
Which I haven't finished.
Okay, I promise I won't spoil anything.
No spoilers, yes.
But there's something that one of the characters says in an earlier season, maybe even the first season, where she says, that's what makes humans humans. Like, we know we're going to die, so we're always a little bit sad all the time. Yeah. And I think that's very true. Maybe it's becoming more true for people in the midst of a global pandemic, where like we're being forced to confront that idea. Maybe even for people who we thought had decades more for their lives and have, contracted this disease and died from it. So yeah, the temporary nature of human life, if you're Buddhist, the temporary nature of all things is a very important thing to ground yourself in. And so falsely extending it doesn't really make any sense. It's contrary to what it means to exist and be conscious, is that at some point you're not anymore.
I think there's some practical issues we need to get around too, because oftentimes any type of post-death communication or extension, there's two different angles it can come about that we should mention, right? You have one, the individual. So let's say if I'm thinking about extending my life through some, uploading my brain to the cloud, or coming up with some level of who I am post death. You got one, my understanding and my ability to do that, and my decision as a person. But then two, you've got another person who might do that. So, for example, I've got a wife, Leslie. So you've got two different parts of it. You could have me who's extending my life, or you could have I die, and then she takes that data and then extends my life. So you have two different parts of it that are going to have different angles to it. So you have one, is that even fair for me to do? That would that mean that she can't remarry? Can she even remarry? Does it affect bigamy laws, right? Do I get to taunt her, say, hey, wait a minute, I see that you're on a date. Don't forget, I can see everything. I'm in the cloud, man. Do I say that? Or you have two. Let's say I was dead for 10 years, and then she takes that data, and then now all of a sudden brings me back. Well, wait a minute. On every gravestone, we tend to put RIP for rest in peace, and now you're telling me I can't rest in peace, that somebody else could have control over me. So even if you did imagine that it was some level of close to an equivalent of a life, that means that I now don't even have control over my life, that somebody else could just like pop me back and bring me back, and all of a sudden say, well, wait a minute, I thought this was done, and now you're bringing me back. And then also, who am I? If I'm frozen in time, I can't imagine that's a life, because when we think about life, it's based on an evolution of kind of like emotional growth. Whereas if you look at a lot of sci-fi movies, one of the problems that they always have with it is, okay, a human being who's alive is going to have emotional growth and change as an individual. Whereas how does a person change if it's based on their past? And that in itself would be highly problematic.
I don't understand, Evelyn. These are your dreams. This is our future.
No, this is not our future. You're not here with me. You're not here now.
You've changed.
So this is actually, as we're getting to the complexities of this post-death AI technology discussion, this is really important to bring up, because we have normal death pre-AI and pre-computing technology that is somewhat simple because it's expected and it's permanent and it happens and then it's done and you move on. But with AI technology, we're so unsure of what it looks like, we're unsure about how it's going to be implemented, and we're so unsure about how it's going to be regulated. So this is our second panel question here. How should we regulate post-death AI technology?
Well, we've seen the heavy debate around something like facial recognition. So, I mean, I can't tell you how heated people would get if any of this becomes a true feasibility. I think you're going to have kind of the religious side of the arguments, but two, you're going to have any type of like legal side about how the data is being used and who has control over that. Is it monetized? Does my avatar does it see advertisements? Do I is there any ability for that? Or also, maybe there's a freemium version. So my wife, after I'm dead, maybe she gets to interact with me, but every once in a while I drink a Pepsi that's sponsored. I mean, where does this go? There's so many different angles for that, and it's it's a true consideration. So from what I've seen, I think a lot of the pursuits to this have kind of backed off. You see Autonomy that got a lot of press 5, 6, 7 years ago. They used to say, hey, you can Skype with your deceased loved one. If you've seen now, they've really kind of backpedaled a little bit. I think as classic in tech, we've seen the promises of what it does to be hype, a lot of hype, and then the actual what it actually does tends to be a lot less than that. However, with that said, we still want to consider this because it's better to consider it now than be surprised later on if anything becomes reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. David, the forethought that goes into this is always so difficult because we kind of that's always the challenging thing when it comes to death-related decision making, is that you don't know what you need until you need it. Your family members will not know what they need in the midst of their grief until you are gone. One thing that I have learned, partly from personal experience and partly from the training that I'm in to become a death doula, is that every death is so unique. Even if you have lost one parent, it doesn't really teach you much about what it will be like to lose the other parent, because it's a different person, a different relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just kind of feels like a new experience, like you're flying blind all over again. So creating patterns around something like that, which is always what we're doing when we talk about computational technology, when we talk about building systems, whether it's a software program or a legal policy, we're talking about taking human behavior and putting it into categories and neat boxes and replicating it, right? Yep. And if you can't do that from person to person, from death to death, even like in the context of a community or a family, how are we ever going to do that at a larger scale? Yeah. So I think the key to regulating this stuff has to be flexibility. There has to be an encouragement to pre-planning. We have to know how to encourage conversations for people to have about these things before it becomes an issue of what would they have wanted if they were alive. Like, no, you should have these conversations with your family now. Maybe not necessarily about uploading your consciousness to an AI, because that still is science fiction. But these conversations about, hey, here's where I, keep this information. That's stuff your family should know. Or, hey, here's my, in case it's not clear to you, here's my system of values that help guide my decision-making every day. You can make a legal document like that. It's called an ethical will. And I think if people were to have those kind of foundational things written down about their values and about what is most important to them and what guides their own decision-making in their life, their family's going to have a lot easier time when they have passed away. So yes, just talk to the people you love. Make sure they know what's important to you. And that will hopefully guide these more complex discussions when the technology that we're faced with reaches a point that it is really confusing.
I've tried everything. Language processing, cryptography, coding. I can't figure it out. Just turn it off. Turn it off.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think that's an area where you're going to see some regulation, is that there really needs to be greater level of uniformity with the platform. So again, a lot of us are spending a considerable amount of time, and if we even think about how it's monetized, putting a considerable amount of value into all these platforms that have dramatically different policies. So I would imagine something in the coming years would actually say, okay, here's how legacy accounts are set up. Here's how any type of password retrieval would happen. I think that's going to be the low-hanging fruit for any type of policy and legislation, and should certainly happen, because right now, if every platform is different, then you wouldn't know how to set this up, even going through any type of will process, if everything is different. Because if I had to actually put down on a piece of paper, all my digital assets, it would be a lot of pieces of paper, right? Because we wouldn't even remember all these places that we've given over our passwords, accounts that we have. But it's incredibly valuable, and also too, I think it's going to prevent a lot of fraud from happening, which is going to be important as well. So yeah, I think we definitely need to create some level of uniformity right now, because it does seem a little bit all over the map.
What we're talking about here, and making distinctions between like legacy planning, for example, and estate planning, and thinking about how they're similar, how they're different. And why we need them, why we need both of them, but in particular, legacy planning.
Yeah, and so legacy planning, for those of you who might not be familiar, legacy planning would be you making decisions about how you would like to be remembered, and you making decisions about where your assets would be distributed or shared, while estate planning is the more traditional legal ideal of like who gets your house and your car if something happens to you. And so those ideas are often like mashed together when we talk about these things. But one thing that's really difficult is just the sheer amount of paperwork that it is for surviving loved ones to address all those things. So you can name a person in your will and say, this is the person who I leave everything to. They will be the executor of my estate. They will have a legal right to act in my stead in any given circumstance. We could really get into the nitty-gritty of how that works, but it is a not quick, not pleasant process for a surviving loved one. It involves courts, it involves lawyers, it is not a Willy Wonka golden ticket for them to do whatever they need to do. They have to, follow a few steps first. And David, please correct me if I'm wrong about anything there.
No.
But so a lot of people will say, like, I'm the executor of this person's will, I'm the power of attorney maybe. Why can't I have access to their Apple products or access to their social media accounts? And it's because there's just a different legal foundation that terms of service for social media is built upon. So it is almost offensive that there's not consistency there already between what an executor of a will can do for physical property compared to social media. So if we haven't even achieved that yet, like, I don't even know where to start with this more complex uploading your consciousness stuff. Like,
well, I think that's why it's good, and especially when people think about it, is to actually talk about those really practical examples, like the wife who's trying to get her husband's iPad information, because those are something that people can relate to. Whereas I think a lot of times when we discuss this, if we use terms that people are less familiar with, or if we're talking in fashion that seems less concrete, then people might say, oh wow, that's something that's never going to affect my life. Whereas at the end of the day, we're all going to die, and we also are usually going to be connected with somebody who is going to pass away and then have a lot of these really important kind of assets. So to your point, Katie, right, like everybody needs to, one, have this conversation, two, and really kind of dictate where they want to see this information go. Because similar to how a lot of times couples have a heart-to-heart about burial versus cremation. That's always kind of a hot topic, and organ donation and do not resuscitate types of situations. I think this needs to also be tacked onto that. So everybody, most couples know to have that conversation about, do you want me to be resuscitated, or what happens if I'm in a coma? We need to also think about these types of situations. And I think it's just a matter of really increasing awareness. People talking about it like we're talking about it, and say, well, this is a big deal because it's affecting all of us. But yeah, it's, fascinating, but also something that we need some real practical movement on as well.
I just think it's important to bring up, in light of what David was just describing, that there's a moment in the movie, there's a moment in Transcendence that I think is really important to notice. And that is that Dr. Castor, when he's on his deathbed, they have this discussion about, hey, we're going to try and do this. Like, there's precedent for it in our research cohort that this is possible. Can we try to upload your consciousness? And he has a discussion with his friends and says, like, I know that you'll feel like you did everything you could to achieve my dreams if you do this. So yes, you can. And that's in contrast to a lot of other sci-fi films where similar things are done, like in the Black Mirror episode, Be Right Back. There is no discussion of consent from the deceased person about whether that's what they would want. So despite the fact that it's kind of a dystopian feel towards the end of Transcendence, I really don't want to give too much away for those who haven't seen it, but the fact that he consented to it is important. And there's also the fact that, like, they could not know what all that AI could accomplish. So when we talk about making these kinds of decisions and making these kinds of legislation, I think it's really important to know what all the options are and to know what the capabilities of our technology really is, so people can be informed about what they're agreeing to. I think people should be very thoroughly informed about what it will mean when they make certain decisions for their loved ones to carry out later. And that does require a lot of homework and some forethought, but I think it's really important that people know that that is work that's worth doing.
hey, Johnny Depp's in this film. But if you think about Johnny Depp's life, which is on trial right now, a lot of people are talking about his personal life. One, it came out that he, hated being in so many of the Pirates of the Caribbean, especially the later ones, right? But if you imagine this type of topic, this is a practical situation for him, right? Is that Johnny Depp eventually is going to die. But what if Disney wants to make another Pirates of the Caribbean in 2050? Do they make it with Johnny Depp's likeness? What if they want to make it, in a fashion that is totally against his type of artistic integrity right now? And then two, you have again his personal life, which there's a lot going on around with it, with his divorce from actress Amber Heard. Well, let's imagine that while they were married for that brief moment in time, that let's say Johnny Depp dies. Well, Amber Heard, what if she had the AI version of Johnny Depp? We would assume that they would be in perpetuity in love. But that's not the case. That's not how humans work. So if we're viewing an AI as equivalent to a human, then we would also have to assume that they could evolve with their love. And as we know from Hollywood and elsewhere in life, that people are in and out of love. But if we're extending this, as we see, also in Be Right Back from Black Mirror, we also would have to have the ability for somebody to get out of it. So I would ask the question, well, then does that mean if we could ever have an AI, could they divorce that person? And then also, if the other person wanted to divorce them and then didn't know how, if they took them offline, is that equivalent to killing? If we're saying it's the equivalent to life, then there would have to be some alteration of what we're viewing, even death or murder or something like that to be. So there's so many different questions, really fascinating. So yeah, thrilled to continue the conversation and psyched to be here talking about it.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, love, life, and death. We covered all the bases here. So if there's any more that anyone else wants to learn, all of David and Katie's information and research will be in the description below, and feel free to get in touch with their work and with them. But for now, Katie and David, thank you so much for coming on the show and providing the facts.
Thank you. I'm going to dance off since we danced off. I'll dance off.
Katie, yes.
Please.
Yes.
Encouraged.
That sums up this month's episode. We hope it gives you all something to think about.
And as you may well know, at the end of every episode, we ask a trivia question related to something that we covered during our sci-fi analysis. If you think you know the answer, send it to us in a tweet. The first person to get the answer will be included in our shout out in next month's episode.
So today's trivia question is, in what other film did a character in Transcendence actually play an AI?
If you like this content, feel free to click that like or subscribe button and share this with your friends.
Yes, and we'll see you next time for
Sci-Fi in real life.
Good night and good luck, humanity.
Dance like only AI is watching. What you need to do.